Hello everyone, Waldos is here, bringing you another Maker Machinations for your daily dose of death traps. Today we're going to be taking part in a community challenge, which has been running over on the Underrealm Gaming Discord, where we'll be building an outpost of the lowest quality plot available at only 750 capacity and 4,500 gem mat. The challenge put forward by our community member Mafetan is to get an outpost of this kind to Prestige 10. Not an easy challenge when you have so little active time and so few traps to work with. For this video, I'm going to be doing a time lapse of the initial building process that I went through to build up this outpost, and I'll be doing another video later on when the base reaches Prestige 10 to show what it turns into. As always, if you do enjoy the video, please make sure to like, comment and subscribe, as it really does help me out in growing the channel. But for now, let's get into it. So to start with, I assessed my plot, finding out where my gem mat was, and I was lucky enough to have a tomb pretty much next to my gem mat. Now, I was originally going to build the path straight in from here, but I decided to leave it until a bit later on once I define my actual path in. And because this is a challenge base, I decided to challenge myself that little bit further by keeping the path pretty much exactly as it was when it was first put in by the game by default. So I just went around cleaning up the outside of it and just making some of the paths that little tiny bit thinner, just to give them a little bit more of a challenge as you go in, just so that they're a bit of angular and the traps are coming from some unusual directions. I then made sure when I was looking at the kind of structure to find exactly where I was going to be able to place some traps, and I was already getting a few ideas as I went along around where I can place them into some angles, because I like using quite angular corridors. And I actually found this nice little ramp here that I could do a bit of a sloped diagonal corridor to have some traps fired down it. I quite like bolt traps in this scenario, which is what I went for in the end. And as you can see here, I just made a few adjustments to the ramp leading up just to put it into the right place. I then decided to expand this room out to turn it into one of the relentless bolt traps that I really have been liking using lately. Originally I was going to make this only sort of 3 tiles wide, but I decided to expand it that little bit just so that it was a little bit more deadly. And I decided to angle the walls in this way so that I could avoid the trap sort of self-firing on itself. I then closed it off and started closing the actual corridors in and getting an idea of where things are going to fall, and blocking all the bottom section off so people don't fall through it. Again, using angular walls here to divide some of the sections off and make it kind of curve to the side. Now moving back over here, I decided to end up this corridor so I know exactly where my dividers are, and again making sure I'm using that angular corridor to change the direction that players are going to give them a bit of a different direction. It was then time to come back to the gen mat and start getting my closing area. And again, using ramps to kind of close this in and make it a bit more angular. At this point, I also started looking at the Forgotten Tomb and how I was going to position myself falling into it to include it as part of this outpost, as it gives me a bit more room to play with if I've got someone going for the relic as well. As you can see here, I'm just going around and closing all the roofs off just to make it so that it makes a bit more sense. And finally, I topped this room off and made myself a bit of an entrance, giving it this little design here to make it just a little tiny bit different as you go in. It also gives some false safety as people look back up that ramp trying to get away from the bolt traps, but they will actually fire up that ramp because they have Hunter on them. In this section then, I started thinking about, okay, how can I get down to the relic, and started building my relic pathing. And I blocked this off with just a nice little enclosed corridor, just to give a bit of claustrophobia as it goes into it, so that people aren't kind of running in, they're thinking a bit more about when they go into it. And you can see here, I kind of take this angular room and go, well, what can I do to make this a little bit more dangerous? And this is where I start putting my first trap in. So for here, I actually box out a section to place a bomb trap, because this room's quite enclosed and you need to go up a ramp to get there. So I kind of break this section down into that area and get my bomb trap with a hollow block underneath it, just to make it a quite nice little bomb trap. And I actually place a impaler at the top of this ramp to be able to stop people from moving backwards by adding blockade to it. I was thinking about putting a bolt trap in this section at the bottom here, but in the end it just seemed like wasted capacity on such a small outpost to spend so much resource on this little section. And here is that impaler that I place in such a way that it will blockade someone into the room where the bombs are. I then started to think about how I can trap my gen mat, and there isn't really much room in this area to do any non-visible traps, so I went back to one of my initial plans, which was to put a downwards facing bolt trap to fire down this long ramp, coming from behind the raider as they come in, which is one of my favourite places to place these. A quick tip here: if you're using this type of trap, make sure to put an angled ceiling in front of it, or the block in front of it will stop the trap from firing down the corridor fully. But that left this little triangular area, which, because people are going to back up from that trap, it made sense to put a hardened corrosive cube into. I then went back to that first room to start setting up my Hunter Relentless trap, using a couple of corrosive cubes to block visibility of the trap as you enter the room. I then used the angled walls to make the traps cross over in the centre of the room, making a deadly point that will fire through both corrosive cubes. I then added the opaque mod to the corrosive cubes to make the bolt traps even less visible. I then decided to have another look at the Gemmat corridor and had the idea of making bombs roll into that corridor, but decided to come back and finish the main room off before going any further, as it was a bit of a difficult corridor to trap. I was trying to wrap my brains here about how to do a good trap using maybe a grabber, but at this point I was still trying to think of the best way of doing it. So I decided to give the Relentless Hunter a check just while I was having a think. I then started thinking about building a holocube bomb trap on this ramp, but the holocube triggers way too early and really doesn't give this any effectiveness, so I kind of abandoned the idea. So instead I decided to block it off, just so that it was the bolt trap because it's nice and hidden. And then I put my bomb trap actually in the side wall here so that it would throw it into the corridor where the Gemmat was. The idea behind this being that I can't really trap that Gemmat corridor very well, and this would give a bit of deadliness to that section. I also put a blockade impaler here so that if you run past it, you're now stuck where the bombs are going to fall. I then was again thinking how to use this grappler a bit more, and ended up putting the grappler on the side wall, and then changing this to a square wall on the opposite side so that I could throw a incinerator at it, because the incinerator will still be firing when the grappler pulls you to that wall, which should make it pretty deadly if someone has tried to run past that incinerator. And with a quick test, it actually worked quite well. And with that, the base was complete at 748 capacity out of 750, ready to try and get that challenge of hitting Prestige 10. And that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this bit of insight into how I build my bases and how I kind of plan them out as I go through. I'd be happy to answer any questions in the comments about the process I go through when I kind of consider what traps I'm using, but for now, I'll see you in the wasteland.